Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. We have made the trip over from Fort Wayne, Indiana, where Sweetwater is located, to Cleveland, Ohio, to visit the headquarters of Dr. Z, and we are here with Dr. Z himself. Great to see you, Mike.
Yeah, great to see you too, Mitch.
Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and your busy time here to sit down with us today.
My pleasure. Nice to see you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming.
You too. Our pleasure. What a fun visit here to be surrounded by all these cool amplifiers, and to see the actual creation of the amps is a lot of fun.
Oh, great. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about the company. How did you get started in this business?
Okay, well, I guess I'm pretty young when I started. My dad was a TV repairman. So the basement of my house kind of looked like how my shop looks.
Yeah.
Tubes and electronic stuff all over the place.
Right.
And my dad was a very generous guy. He spent a lot of time showing me and helping me, and any interest that I had in it, he kind of bred that interest. And I was in bands. It was in the early 60s, of course, when the Beatles were coming in, and there were basement bands in just about every house in every suburb, and mine was no different. I was a drummer, so everyone would leave their gear at my house if they would come to my house for practice. And my guitar players should only know some of the things I did to their amps as I experimented and learned about how to fool with guitar amps. Right. So that kind of grew inside of me, and I went on and got my degree in engineering, electrical engineering, and went on and had a kind of a nice career. I worked for General Electric in medical systems. But boy, after 15 years or so, I was like, wow, I certainly wanted to get back to music, my first love. And I was fortunate enough to be able to integrate my love for electronics as well as my love for music. And I started in 1988 with Dr. Z amps.
Okay.
I have been incredibly lucky to meet artists and kind of hit it off. The first one was Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh was basically an adopted son of Cleveland. He wasn't born in Cleveland, but he lived here. He went to Kent. His band, the James Gang, was here, based in Cleveland. So I had a connection with Joe, and when the Eagles got back together for the Hell Freezes Over tour, Joe came to me and wanted me to make him an amp, and I did. And that was my first big break. I mean, I was an unknown at the time. And to see my amps on stage with the Eagles, which was probably the biggest touring show at the time, really gave me quite a leg up.
Sure.
And it's just been that kind of snowball ever since. And I truly appreciate the luck that I had, as well as the hard work that I put in to get to this point.
Sure. So did you reach a point where you said, okay, I'm done working for GE, and now I'm going to start an amp company, or were you kind of crossing over there?
Yeah, I kind of crossed it over. My children had to finish high school. Was one of the things my wife told me. Right. Let the kids get through with school, and then if you want to do your little amp thing, you can do it. Right. But she was very supportive of me, and I truly appreciate that. Because, there would be just musicians coming to my house and playing amps all hours of the day and night at all kinds of volume levels. Right. And, everyone was very supportive of me, until I finally got into a shop of my own and then started to grow the business. So,
right.
So yeah.
So what were those first amps like? Were you building something that came out of your head, or were you duplicating other things, or your take on vintage things?
Well, there were a couple of areas that I kind of went off on my initial designs. First off, I met an individual. His name was Charlie Job. And Charlie was the Hammond organ expert for the country. During the NAMM shows, Hammond would bring Charlie and, hold him up and say, look who we got. And if you kind of look at some of the early Jimmy Smith's jazz Hammond albums, you'll see credits to Charlie Job. Charlie did all the percussive mods and all of the changes to his organs. And I happened to run across him, and I met Charlie. And man, he was in his 80s when I met him. But for some reason, we just kind of hit it off. You know, we had similar interests. And I went to his house, and his house was just loaded with just electronic gear. It was amazing. He was, you know, in his 80s, and he would go to these old folks' homes and play. He had instruments that he made. He had synthesized instruments that he built, and he would go there and entertain people that weren't even as old as him.
Right.
You know? It was really unique. And as I walked around his shop one day, I noticed these little chassis that had EL84s in them, and they were kind of cool little chassis. I said, Charlie, what are those, you know? And he goes, those are reverb amps. You know, they're an option for a Hammond. You know, nobody uses them. You use a Leslie with a Hammond. You don't use reverb. So I saw them. I said, man, you know, I'd like to buy these. I think I could turn these into guitar amps, you know? And at the time, if you recall, the little Marshall 18-watt amps were kind of all the rage. You know, they were kind of being imported. And I kind of looked at those and thought, man, those are pretty similar. So I bought these amps from Charlie, and I modified them, and they turned into the Carmen Gias, which I still build today. I could remember going to a guitar show, and I had some Carmen Gias with me that I brought to the show. And there was a gentleman that was looking, and he was looking at the back of them and looking at the front. He goes, those are Hammond organ chassis, aren't they? And I says, yeah, they are. He goes, man, I bought a warehouse in Chicago, and there's like 2 skids of those. He says, you want to buy them? I said, man, I'll buy every one of them. So I got, 30 or so of those chassis. So I was able to build that many Carmen Gias because I had the bases for them. And then when those kind of ran out, I went and designed my own chassis and had the transformers reproduced and started building Carmen Gias on my own. So that was kind of the first area that I went off into. And, you know, it's kind of surprising that I would take an existing amplifier and turn it into a guitar amp. But basically, that's what Terry Kath did in Chicago. He had a Bogan PA head that he kind of modified that he used. And man, it just had that growly, snappy sound that he had, you know. And that always I was always kind of intrigued with that thought. And that's what kind of led me down the kind of do-it-yourself, taking something, an existing piece of equipment, and turning it into something else more useful.
Right.
So that was kind of that amp. And then the amp that I made for Joe Walsh that he took on the Eagles tour was kind of a Marshall variation. It was the SRZ 65. Mm-hmm. So it was a kind of a 65 watt EL 34 amp. It was ultra linear. I kind of always used my own little spin in my designs. But it was, you know, kind of loosely based on a JCM 800, kind of cascaded gain. But everything else from there was kind of unique. And it had a very nice sound to it. And Joe kind of liked it, and he used it, and it went from there. So from the SRZ 65, then I kind of progressed to a more voxier stuff. And that was where the Maz 38 and the Maz 18 was born. And those were the EL 84 amps that I kind of built. And that was kind of where I maybe got my reputation or whatever, or kind of started building more and more amps that people were buying.
Right.
And it just went from there.
Right. So given that you started on drums and kind of got into the guitar amp thing via the musicians you were with, how does your ear perceive the tone? Do you have something that you're aiming toward? Are you listening for something in particular when you design an amplifier?
Well, you know, I guess, you know, going back before that, I mean, I was kind of always the guy that when someone would buy a stereo, they would come and get me and go, man, listen, what do you think, Z? How does this sound? Because I guess, kind of had a pretty good ear for sounds and music. So that was kind of always with me. But when you talk about what sounds, you know, kind of made me design different amps, you know, pretty much the English stuff in the beginning, some of the English blues and English kind of stuff is kind of where I went with my designs, with my 84 and 34 designs. Like everyone else, I kind of like the Invasion, the Who, all that kind of British Invasion music kind of impressed me because that was that time, Mitch, in the mid 60s. So that always got to me. And, I did kind of just do a YouTube video. I kind of did a 10 best list, kind of a David Letterman-ish kind of thing. And kind of listed 10 songs that even to today still kind of impressed me and inspired me to some of the tonal desires that I have. It is varied. I mean, it's from John McLaughlin with Miles Davis, all the way through to Mountain, to Leslie West and Mountain, and everything in between. So many different tonations kind of catch my ear. And I hear that and I think, man, how can I reproduce that? Or when I'm designing an amp and I listen to other players play it, because I'm a drummer, I try to dial in those certain sounds and different things that I catch when I hear the amp.
Right. You mentioned Joe Walsh earlier, and you collaborated on a couple of amplifiers with him. And another one of your big collaborators is Brad Paisley. You've done 4 or 5 amps with Brad, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the process of collaborating with an artist to create a particular model amplifier.
Well, it depends on the artist, of course. Sometimes they'll come to you and tell you what they would like. Or sometimes they'll hear an amp of yours and they'll go, boy, this is nice, but can you do this or can you do that? So it's either taking an existing product and tweaking it to taste, kind of seasoning it like a chef would do, or kind of coming up with something from scratch. And basically, the artist, they have that sound in their head that we always hear about.
Right.
Boy, I want that. Yeah, I hear this and I hear that. And sometimes it's kind of difficult for them to verbalize that, and then for me to take that verbalization and turn it into a schematic of an amp that's going to make that kind of sound. But I find that, the more and more I work with them, the easier it is. And one little trick that I found worked really well for me was as I was tweaking an amp, okay? So when you talk about tweaking an amp, you basically adjusting capacitors for different responses and frequencies, different tubes that might have a little different sound to them, is I would record it. I would have the artist come in and I would set up like Pro Tools and play a passage with this capacitor in this tube. And we'd record it. Then I would change it, record it again, and then listen to it. So this way you can back and back, and then you have them all, and the artist can go, ooh, that's the one I want. So you can go back then and make the adjustments. Is this what you want? Oh yeah, man, that sounds great. So kind of recording it, because your memory, listening sound-wise, it's kind of difficult to do.
Right.
And sometimes you're not sure what you hear, but when you record it and then go back to it, man, that's putting a stethoscope on it.
Right.
That's really, really listening. And you can really hear exactly what it does. And that allows you to fine tune it. It takes a little bit of time to do that.
Sure.
But in the end, it's amazing how well it works.
How much do customer suggestions and their input make their way into your amplifier designs?
Well, I kind of really look at that a lot. And, now with all of the forums, there's so much information that people can put out.
Right.
And there's so much data that you can read about. I kind of read them and I try to have, as thick a skin as I can have, not be too sensitive about critiques of my product. But I will read what they say and I'll kind of think about it and say, you know what, he's right. That reverb is a little weak, or it is a little noisy, or maybe it is a little too bright. And I'll listen to what they say, and if I agree with them, then I'll try to adjust the amp such to give them what they want. Now, everyone hears things a little different. Everyone's got their own opinion. And if you get 10 guitar players in a room, you're going to get 10 different opinions. So you got to be careful about what you do so you're not just bouncing around. But basically, I evolve things and I listen to what people say. And if it seems to make sense to me, I go, yeah, it's a good point. And not let my ego get in the way or say, well, what do they know? I know. That's not it. That's not the case. I think an advantage that I have, and I've always said this, and I don't know if it's true or not, but because I'm not a guitar player, I don't build an amp to the sound I want. There's so many builders out there that build amps to the tones that they want to hear. And I guess that's great for a small group of people that might agree with what they like, but it's not the broad brush. It's not the broad palette of everyone out there. So I have to kind of just technically build the best, most reliable product I can make, build it as nicely as I can build it and package it as well as I can. But then also sonically try to make it so that it fits the different genres of music of people that like. And I have to say that, my amps are on stages in country music and blues and rock. I'm not maybe so much in the heavy metal or the heavier or higher gain amps. I really haven't entered that very much. But boy, there certainly is quite a few genres of music that my amps fit in. And because of that broad brush that I paint with, it kind of has helped me be successful for 32 years because I've got a big audience.
Right.
And I can make stuff that people will like.
Sure. Right. So looking back to the late 80s and coming forward, I know the answer is always, they're all my children. I like all of them equally. But give us an idea of your favorite amplifiers that you've made through the years.
Well, the Route 66 was always kind of a favorite for me, just because of the adoration that it got. And it used these KT66 tubes, which are just so phenomenal sounding. I mean, they're amazing. So the Route 66, definitely. The Stangray was one that, I've seen on stages and heard people play and saw how well it sounded. I still love that. The Carmen Ghia, it's a simple little two-knob amp that I've been building for 32 years unchanged. And it's still popular today, and still people buy it, put it in studios. It's the kind of amp that a guitar player just plugs in, sets the volume for how loud he wants to be, sets the tone for his guitar, turns around, closes his eyes, and just plays. And doesn't worry about, where's my mid control? Do I have the mid boost on? Is my bright switch on? Is, all of the myriad of controls that vary the tonation of an amp. This is simple. And that's kind of what I like. If you look at a lot of my designs, they're 2 and 3 knob designs. It's the magic's in the fingers. The magic of the sound is on the other end of the cord. It's not the cord that's in the amp. You just got to give somebody a good sound, a good reliable amp that will reproduce the tonation of their guitar and what they want. And the simpler, the better. The shorter the path, the richer the tone. And that's what I've always believed in.
Sure. So given that, do you spend any time considering how the amps are going to react with pedals and different types of drives and different modulation effects and things?
Yeah, I always have, and because pedals are so important. I mean, you don't see a guitar player now on stage without a pedal board. He's tapping and he's playing. So yeah, I try to give them the maximum amount of clean that my amps can give. I don't really rely on a lot of gain. So they are very well influenced by pedals and work pretty well. And like with the Route 66, I used an EF86 preamp tube. And that preamp tube sucks in pedals. I mean, it makes like the pedals inside the amp. It has such a broad array of sound that it can take. It can take a 3-volt peak-to-peak signal and not clip, and not asymmetrically clip like a 12AX7 can. That's one of the problems with 12AX7 front ends is that, we're used to hearing it. That's what's in most amps. But you do get an asymmetric mid-range kind of clip or distortion from a 12AX7 when you overdrive it. And they all kind of sound the same. So, using different tubes, using the 5879 like I do on the DB4 and the EF86 like I do on the Route 66 and the Route 66 style of amps that I built, kind of gives that uniqueness to the front end and allows it to be pedal friendly and also have its own kind of voice right from the get-go.
Right. That's so awesome. Mike, thanks so much for sitting down with us today.
Oh,
It's
man,
been
my
a
pleasure.
pleasure to spend
Yeah.
some time with you and check
Yeah.
things out.
Thank you.
And, of course, enjoy the amplifiers as well. So we
Thanks.
really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us here in Cleveland, Ohio. We're at Dr. Z HQ with Dr. Z. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.
Thank you.